Hi everyone, it's Lindsay. Welcome back to another video. I am so excited to share today's video with you. I'm going to show you how to make these mini artworks. So we're going to transfer photos onto canvas, color photos to be exact. A very long time ago, I made a video on how to transfer laser print images, photos onto canvas. I will leave that video linked in the top right hand corner. And very recently, I showed you how to make paper. And how to make a mold and decal very cheaply to make paper. Well, in that video, I used some canvases, but I took the canvas off of the frame. And I said I'd save that canvas for another project. And so here's that project that I am going to do with this leftover canvas from my first project. I will leave that video in the top right hand corner as well. It's really easy. You just take the canvas off of the frame itself, add some screening, and you have a mold and decal for very cheap. So what I'm doing, once I've removed that canvas off of the actual frame, it does have a little bit of a crease to it where it's been folded over and stretched. So I'm just using a mini iron. This is one that you would use for like vinyl, but a household iron will do the trick, even a straightening iron for your hair. You just want to make sure that this is nice and flat, and I want as much usable area as I can get out of this piece. So I'm just going to iron those edges, make sure I get all of those ridges out, and it's nice and flat for me to work on. I'm going around those edges, and then once I am done, this is what it will look like, nice and flat and ready to have those images transferred onto them. And you can totally skip this part. You can just cut these sections off if you wanted to, but really this does add quite a bit of working space onto that piece of canvas. And I like to get as much use out of my products as I can, so I just take the time to do this extra step. If you want to, you can just cut off the edges though. So I am going to be working with some art prints. These are ones that I have found online. They are in the public domain. There are a lot of different websites where you can find these. I like to find them on the Met Museum website, the New York Art Gallery website. The Smithsonian also has a great digital collection. There are a lot of different images that you can find. I will throw a few of these up for free over on my blog where I've already laid them out and kind of sized them. But you can download these, size these as you wish, and then you just want to print them out. Here's the important part. When you print, you have to print with a laser printer. What do I mean by a laser printer? Not an inkjet. If your printer uses ink, it will not work. If your image uses toner to print, it will work. That is a laser printer. You can get these printed at a not a coffee shop, an office supply store. Maybe your coffee shop has one. I don't know. But an office supply store will print these as well for a small fee. I am doing mine in color. This works in black and white. It works great in black and white, but I wanted to do mine in color today to really show off those colors in the artwork and create some mini art pieces for my journaling. Now this is a great home decor piece as well, like I've done before with my photos. Again, check out that video if you want to do it with photos. This is just more for my journaling, my paper crafting. So what you want to do once you have printed those off, I should mention too, when you are printing, you need to print onto regular computer paper, nothing thick. I will leave a link down below to my Amazon storefront. In that, it is going to have the printer I use, the toner I use, the paper I use, the scissors I am using, all of the supplies I am using, you will find in that storefront, so you can easily find what I am talking about. As I am cutting these out, you want to make sure that you leave as much white off as possible. The white edges have no toner on them. Nothing is going to transfer. You're just creating more work for yourself. So I like to take the time now to really cut right up against those edges, only leaving the color portion. Again, I like to get as much use out of my products as I can, and I don't want to waste it on pieces that aren't going to transfer. And I don't want to waste product on trying to glue those pieces down when I don't need to, because nothing's going to happen. So go ahead and cut off all that extra white border. just leaving the color portions. This will work with any size image, so you can see I have quite a few different sizes. I have some large, I have some small. You can really do any image size as long as you can print it off. Once I am done cutting all of these out, I like to lay them out and get an idea of where everything is going to go as I am putting them onto my canvas. This just saves me some time, and it saves me kind of a panic as I'm putting these down and not thinking about things drying and it's too late and those things. So I like to kind of plan it out a little bit beforehand and just make sure everything will fit nicely. Now, to glue these down onto the canvas, I will be using gel medium. This comes in two different finishes. It comes in a gloss and it comes in a matte. Both will work. I will be using matte today because that is the finish that I want. If you want a glossy finish, use the gloss gel medium. I have had a lot of questions about if this will work with Mod Podge and those kinds of things. I don't know. That's not how I use it. I think Mod Podge does sell a photo transfer medium. You can try that. That's not what I use. I use gel medium. I will link it over on my Amazon storefront. To put this down onto the canvas, I am using a foam brush. These are very cheap. I reuse mine until I can't reuse them anymore. Just make sure you rinse them out when you're done. When you're putting down the gel onto the canvas, I like to work in sections. That way I know everything has a good grip. It's nice and wet when I put the images down onto it. So I just use a nice thick layer of the gel medium, and again, working in sections. And I want to make sure that I'm not having a ton of brush strokes. You want to make this a nice, even, thicker coat. And once I have it all smoothed out, it's time to start putting those images down onto the wet gel medium. You want to make sure this is nice and wet and nice and smooth. So I'll give it one last smooth, and then it's time to start putting those images down. Now, the images themselves, I am going to flip over so the toner faces the glue. That's the part you want to stick to the glue, so we're going to make sure that it is nice and embedded in there. I will flip it over, give it a good press with my fingers, just to make sure that it's pressed down into that. And again, I want to use as much of this canvas as I can, so I'm going to fit these pieces pretty close together. One thing, as you are doing this artwork, if you will, or these pieces, the majority of mine do not have words on them. If you are using artwork pieces that have words, if you want to do some tags, if you want to do labels, those kinds of things, when you print, you need to make sure you do a mirror print. So as I'm placing these face down, the image is getting flipped. It's getting inverted. Kind of like if you would flip something horizontally in one of your photo programs. That's what it's doing here. So anything you put down is going to be the opposite. So that's how it's going to pull. Keep that in mind. So whenever you go to print, if you have numbers, if you have letters, if you have words, if you have images that you want orientated the right way, whenever you print, you need to do a mirror image. So keep that in mind. Otherwise, it's not going to look right, and I'll show you that on a few different pieces here. I did 4 examples just to kind of show you what that's going to look like if you don't mirror your image. So I'm going to go ahead and just continue to fill this. This is kind of why I lay these pieces out, so I have an idea of what I want to put down and where, and I'm not wasting hardly any space. So you can see these are nice and bumped up against each other. They're all fitting pretty well. And then I've got this last little bit here that I'm just going to fill in with a few different little pieces. Once I have all of the pieces on where I want them, I am going to give them a little bit of a burnish with, I'm using a scraping tool. You can use your finger, you can use a stamp block, you can use an old credit card, gift card, all different kinds of things. You just want a nice crisp edge where you can get out all those little air bubbles. So here you can see I've got some of those. If it is in an air pocket and the toner isn't touching the glue, the toner isn't going to stick to the glue. So you want to make sure that all of those air pockets are pushed out. I like to use a scraping tool. I also like to use a stamping block. You can use an old credit card, like I said, gift card, just something to get those air bubbles out. Your finger works great. You just want to make sure, again, that we're pressing down and pressing those images right into that medium. So again, the toner is going to stick. Anywhere where you have an air pocket or that toner isn't touching the glue, it's not going to stick. So as you remove that paper on top, the toner is going to come right off with it. It's not going to be left behind. You're not going to get the image you want. And you will see that on a few pieces. It's bound to happen on a few of them when you're doing this many pieces. It gives it a little bit more of a distressed look, which I like. But if you don't, you want to make sure you really press those down, burnish them down, and you get all those air bubbles out. Now you have to let it dry completely. I let mine dry overnight, even a few days if you want. It's really up to you. No right or wrong way. Just make sure it's completely dry. Then you're going to come in with some water. And I'm using a sponge here to get these nice and wet. This is why you want to make sure it's nice and dry. And then you're just going to start rubbing away that paper on top. You don't want to use a lot of pressure. Let the water and the friction do the work. Don't really rely on the pressure. That is going to remove that paper right on top, and you're going to be left with just the image on the canvas itself. And it is such a cool technique. It is so easy to do once you get the hang of it. Just continue to roll away those papers. Now, if you like to use the sponge, I tend to just use the sponge to wet my images, but again, it works to peel up the paper. But what I find the most kind of useful is my finger. That way I can really kind of feel it and feel what's rolling away and if there's any paper left behind. So I like to use my finger as much as I can here. It can start to get a little crampy after a while, just take a break. But the sponge comes in really helpful to dampen those pieces at first and start letting that paper kind of soften up. So then when you go in with your finger, you can just roll it right away like I did here. I continue to just do this process through the entire piece of paper until I have fully removed all of that first layer of paper. And you'll be able to tell once you have removed the majority of that top layer of paper because the color will really start to soak or to show through. So here you can see on this very bright, vibrant painting I'm doing, I'm rolling away after I've wetted it down, let that water soak in for a minute, and just start rolling away those pieces of paper. I'm letting the friction do the work. I'm not using a lot of pressure here because if you do, you will scratch it up with those paper pieces and just take off more of the toner than you need to. So there you can see on the left side where I've removed that paper, it's nice and vibrant and you're left with just the toner itself. Where on the right side, we still have that paper and it's still foggy. So a little bit more work to do on all of these pieces. Some of these had a few more air bubbles than I preferred, but that's okay. It was getting late when I was doing this, so that really doesn't surprise me. I got a little impatient. Now, as you're working on this and you're making your way across, the first pieces that you do will start to dry, and you'll start to see areas where maybe I didn't get all of the particles of paper. Let them dry slightly, then go back in with a wet finger. Don't wet the painting anymore, but a wet finger and just roll over those, and that will get up all those little bits. I like to keep a brush off to the side to be able to dust off the extra pieces of paper that kind of pill up as I'm doing those final last run-throughs. But you do want to make sure that you get as much of that paper off as you possibly can, or it will leave a foggy result. Once I'm happy with the way everything looks, I am going to set it aside to dry for just a second. You want to make sure that you get all of the paper pieces off, and you want to make sure that that water has time to evaporate. So give it a few hours, make sure it's nice and dry, all that water is gone, all those paper pieces have been brushed away, because the next step is going to seal everything into place. And we don't want any little bits of paper left behind, and we don't want any water under the surface that's going to give it kind of that foggy look, if you will. So what I'm going to do is seal mine with more of the gel medium, but I'm going to tinge mine just a little bit with some ink. This is Vintage Photo, I believe, from Tim Holtz. Any sort of, you could even use a paint for this if you wanted to, an acrylic paint. Any sort of water-based medium will mix really well with this gel medium. And I just wanted a little bit more of a vintage look. It's not super dark, but it does just give it a little something extra, especially on those pieces where maybe I took off a little bit more toner than I was wanting to. So I'm going to mix that in with a palette knife, and I've got my little foam brush ready to go to place this right on top of those pieces. Make sure this gets mixed in nice and well. I'm just doing this on a piece of acrylic, and then it's time to start brushing it over the top of the images. What this is going to do is seal everything into place and make sure that none of that toner gets scratched off when you're putting it in your journals or you're working with these pieces, even storing them. You know, it just gives it a protective layer, kind of like a varnish on top of a true painting would. So I'm going to quickly brush this on. Again, you can see it's not adding a ton. If you want to add more color to this, by all means, you can make it as dark or as light. You don't have to add any color. You can just seal it all in if you wanted to. But I'm just going to quickly brush this right over the top and seal all of those layers into place. Again, I am using the matte version of the gel medium, but in this case, if you wanted to add a glossy finish, by all means, do that with the gloss gel medium. You can get it in the different finishes. You can use them both together. You can create kind of a semi-gloss by mixing the two together. A lot of different variations you can do with that. Play around with it, have some fun, and find out what fits your style. One thing I do want to mention too, you don't have to use specifically one or the other. You can use both. So you can do the matte to put it down. You can do the gloss to finish it off and create a nice shiny finished piece. Now, once I've put on that clear protective layer, I'm going to let it dry fully. Again, this only takes a few hours, very thin layer I was working with. Then it's time to start cutting out all of our pieces. For this, I'm just using a pair of scissors, and then I wanted to fray my edges just a little bit. So I'm grabbing another set of scissors, kind of opening up that blade and just scraping along those edges. And that's going to start to peel them, fray them a little bit, and really give them a more vintage look. This is just a little technique I like to use, not only on canvas, but on paper as well, just to roughen up those edges and create that true vintage look. Then I can grab a few of those fibers, start pulling them out, and really creating some nice sort of texture on these pieces. Now this piece is one of those tinier ones that I worked on, and I absolutely love it. They just turned out so incredibly cute. I adore the way these turned out. As you look at a close-up of this finished piece, you can see that that gel on top with the little bit of ink didn't add a lot, but it added just a little bit of a vintage look to these. I'm going to continue just to cut these out with my scissors. I'm cutting away those extra bits along the edge just to save those pieces off to the side. I can always throw them in for some texture in my junk and vintage journaling. So I like to keep those just in a little box with scraps of different kinds of fabrics, and I can just grab out little bits as I want to use them in my journaling. So I do like to cut off as large of a section as I can, especially along those edges. And again, just throw it into my scrap bin to use on future projects. And I just finished by cutting these all out and then storing them. Now to store them, I stored them in just a clear plastic container because these have that protective gel medium over the top. They don't really reactivate to any sort of water that's on them. You just might not want to keep them in a very humid environment. And if they do start to curl because of the canvas itself, you can flip them over and iron it from the back to kind of flatten them out again. Now here are some of the finished pieces. These I absolutely love so much. Make sure that if you want these true to their original state, that you do use that mirror image print. I did not do that here, but if you want them true to form, please use the mirror image in your printer options. Now you can really see that canvas texture on these pieces. I absolutely adore them. And I want to show you how I have already used one of them in an upcoming project. So a little sneak peek coming up here. I actually used this image right here and I put it in one of my frames that I made with my silicone mold video. I will leave that video linked in the top right hand corner. I just framed it up with one of those little frames made from clay and added it to a little notebook that I have coming up in a future video. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you guys so much for watching and happy crafting, everyone.